Well, good morning. Good to see each of you that showed up on a gorgeous day before Memorial Day weekend, I guess I could call it. We are in the book of Acts, chapter 6. Next week starts our summer Sunday school series. So if all goes well, you won't be seeing me again for 13 weeks, at least as your teacher. If something goes sideways, you might see me, but so it is. Yeah, right. Well, thank you. So we're gonna jump into chapter 6 here this morning. We're gonna do the first 7 verses, and then in 14 weeks, Lord willing, we'll come back and pick up from there. But it's actually a pretty good breaking point in the chapter, because right after the section we studied today, we will jump into Stephen, the first martyr of the church. And there's quite a lengthy section in the book of Acts on him. Probably the bulk of it is a sermon that he preached, or a speech that he gave, that basically covers the entire span of Israel's history. So that's kind of fun, but that's for a few months from now. For today, then, we are in Acts chapter 6, and the first 7 verses is what I'd like to cover. You should have a handout. Justin is the man if you're missing one. And let's just jump right in here. Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. Now at this time, while the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint arose on the part of the Hellenistic Jews against the native Hebrews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food. And you might be scratching your head wondering, who are these two groups? Who are the Hellenists and who are the Hebraists? You have any guesses off the top of your head about who these might be, or what distinguishes them? Does the word Hellenistic or Hellenist mean something to you? Greek, exactly. Mm-hmm. In fact, in Greek, the name for a Greek person is Hellene, or some version of that. That's how they refer to them. That's where we get the term Hellenistic. So yeah, it's Greek Jews and Hebrew Jews. What are the Greek ones doing in Jerusalem? And who even are they? Get kicked out of Greece or somewhere else? Uh-huh. It's a fun question, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we saw a bunch in fact, listed at Pentecost. And they had come much earlier. Apparently, were quite a few around at Passover, at the crucifixion. And here I am already assuming that you know who these people are and where they come from, and we've kind of hinted at it. These are Jews, like ethnic Jews, that have been living in the diaspora. So that's almost anywhere other than Palestine, Judea, Samaria, Galilee. What is it that sets them aside? I mean, so what if I'm from Nebraska and you're from Utah or Pennsylvania? What's the difference? Well, not much here in the States. But in this case, if a Jew comes from, I've got a map on the back of your handout. And it actually comes out of verse 9, which we're not getting to today. But In verse 9, there's a synagogue of the freedmen that includes Cyrenians, Alexandrians, some from Cilicia and Asia, just to throw some names out there. Those are diaspora places. And I've got them in little boxes on this map for you. Asia is Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. Cilicia is the southeastern coast. That's the same place that Paul was from, believe it or not. Tarsus is located there. Alexandria is a major city that had a very large Jewish population in the Delta region of Egypt. And Cyrene, well, you know a guy in the New Testament from Cyrene. Yeah, Simon of Cyrene. Again, North Africa, a large Jewish population there as well. So this gives you just a beginning taste of where the diaspora were located. Many other places as well. But, okay, so one of the major things that sets apart these Hellenists from the native Jews, the Hebraists, is language. Those that grew up in Asia, Cilicia, Cyrene, Alexandria, for example, spoke Greek. Yes, that was their native tongue. Now, did some of them go to Hebrew school? No, maybe. But they spoke Greek. That was their mother tongue. And, of course, they went to visit the Holy Land at some point in their life and maybe even move there. Some of these seem to have moved there. But they have Greek language and Hellenistic culture. That's what they grew up in. That's what they're accustomed to. He did. Alexander the Great. It was at this time. We have three. In fact, one of the Gospels tells us that the sign above Jesus' cross was in three languages: Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. The Romans spoke Latin. That was their mother tongue. So a lot of Roman soldiers and those kinds of things, governors, official communication was done in Latin. Greek was the language everybody knew. And then Hebrew was the local language there in Palestine in the first century. The Hebrew Jews, the Hebraists by contrast, had grown up in the land of Palestine, probably could understand a smattering of Greek and perhaps even a little Latin on occasion, but their mother tongue was Hebrew. And so we have, at bare minimum, a major language divide between these two groups. And as soon as you understand that, you can understand how there would be some miscommunication and misunderstanding, and how the widows who were Greek-speaking may not have been attention paid to them, a good solid part of what was going on among those that spoke Hebrew. There's also cultural stuff as well. Can you imagine in our day, most of us, I assume, are probably native English speakers. We have pockets in our area of Spanish speakers. Imagine if a group of them came and wanted to meet with us in our church, use the same building, maybe have a separate service because of the language thing. It would be real easy to have a divide, right? I mean, that would be natural. It's like, well, I love them in the Lord. I know they're brothers and sisters, but we have trouble communicating. And so we'll let them do their thing, and we'll give them a hug every now and then, and we'll do our thing. And you can see how that would happen. And that, I think, is a pretty good representation of what's going on here. There's a language issue, a language barrier, and some cultural stuff too, which that's hard to put your finger on. Did they all dress differently? Did they get up at different times of day, have different customs, things that they ate or things that they wouldn't eat, or preferences of those kinds? It's hard to tell. Culture's a little hard to put your finger on, but what's up with the widows here? Yeah, I read an interesting thought, one of my commentaries. The guy kind of drew this word picture. You can imagine a couple that lives, say, in Cyrene, a Jewish couple, and as they near the end of life, they decide, you know what, it would just be great to move to Jerusalem and live out our days there. And they move there, and he dies. What is she going to do? Hundreds of miles from home, old enough not to, be able to work or remarry or whatever, probably removed from family. That's a widow in need. And of course, we have just talked here about the way the church would share and support those in need. And those kind of people, I think, would be truly in need. That's not a case of laziness or don't want to work or mooching off the system. That's somebody that needs some help. And so apparently they did a daily, or in some cases weekly, we think, food run. We know historically that the Jews had a weekly food giveaway, or sometimes it was even just a little bit of money for those who were living in their communities. They called it the kupa, weekly support that was given out every Friday, and included enough either provisions or money for 14 meals. Now, this would not be like go out to eat type meals. This would be like buy yourself a little loaf of bread, subsistence level. The Jews also had a daily distribution. They call it the tamui. That was for people that were not like residents, but they were there for a short time. And so if they were truly in need, they would get a daily ration. And it could be that the church did something similar to this. Perhaps a weekly amount for those that were resident, living there, going to die there, and then a daily for people that they knew of that needed it. It wouldn't surprise me if they followed the Jewish custom there. Does that answer your question about widows? Kind of. We have some interesting archaeological evidence out of Jerusalem. I didn't write it on there. Good. Can you tell what language this is in? Yes. Did you pick out a letter like a delta or? Yep. Yeah, it's Greek. It's an inscription that was originally built into the wall of a synagogue in Jerusalem, the first century. And it describes who built the synagogue, what its purpose was, and then who founded it. Theodotus is the first name that comes up at the top. I'll show you this again when we come back in a few months. There are a fair number of scholars that actually think this may be the synagogue, an inscription from the synagogue of the freedmen that we see in verse 9. And it might be kind of fun to just read through it quickly with you. But while we're here, he refers to himself. Okay, so it's a little rough, but it appears a couple times. Archisunagogos. Archi is chief or leader. Sunagogos is synagogue. So he's the head of the synagogue leader. He's actually the son of a synagogue leader. That one's broken up too. He's a priest. Well, we have. Okay, so sunagogos. The word synagogue on this inscription a couple of times, and yet, even though it's in Jerusalem, it's in Greek. Okay. We have some Hellenists, even in the Jewish population, not just in the Christian population, living here at this time. Here's another fun one. I can't read this whole thing for you, but it's a plaque. You can tell it's Jewish because of the little menorah at the bottom. That was a typical symbol that the Jews used throughout the Mediterranean basin to identify themselves. And most of this inscription is, again, in Greek. There's a little scratch at the bottom in Aramaic, but 2nd century, so a little later than our time. And then these two things from Corinth. Now this is in Greece proper, not too far from Athens. The inscription up at the top, we have the end of the word synagogue. You can see a gamma, omega, gamma, and an eta, synagogue, and then Ebr, E-B-R, as it were. Yeah, synagogue of the Hebrews, written in Greek in Corinth, of all places. And then, of course, the little ornamental piece below it, which undoubtedly came from the same building, has menorahs, 3 little menorahs as decorative pieces. Nobody used the menorah other than Jews. It symbolized the temple. So here in this far-flung city, we have more evidence of Jews, but Hellenistic Jews, Greek-speaking Jews. And that's who we've got here as well. So, they have this complaint that needs to be addressed. Acts chapter 6, verse 2, then the 12, that would be the 12 disciples, or perhaps now apostles, summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, "It's not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables. But select from among you, brethren, 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word." So the 12 don't want to be distracted by administering something like this. They clearly agree it's an issue that needs to be addressed, but they don't themselves want to be distracted by it. They would rather remain focused on prayer and the Word of God. And going by the things that they've been doing, I would assume that includes a lot of teaching and evangelism, those kinds of things. So they asked the congregation to appoint, to present to them for confirmation, as we'll see here in a moment, 7 men full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom. And so they do that. Verse 5, the statement found approval with the whole congregation, and they chose, okay, now we're going to get a list of 7 names. Well, let me just read them, and I'll come back and describe some stuff here. They chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and presumably that applies to each of these as well, and Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmesan, not really, but every time I see the word Parmenas, I think Parmesan. I love cheese and I love Parmesan, but this Parmenas I would have to love in the Lord, and not to eat him. And Nicholas, a proselyte from Antioch. Now here's an interesting thing. Every one of these 7 names is a Greek name. Now you think to yourself, big deal, the book was written in Greek, so of course it's going to be a Greek word. Well, No, they actually are Greek names, not Hebrew names written out in Greek. We have many of those as well. The word Jesus, Yeshua, that's written out Jesus. It's written out in Greek, but it's a Hebrew name. It's the same name as Joshua. And it actually means something in Hebrew. In Greek, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a name, kind of like Kris or Amy. You look it up in a word book. They would give some meaning for our names, but you know what I mean. See, I have an odd fascination with names when they appear in the biblical text, and so if you don't like this stuff, just tune out for a little while because I want to show you some examples. I get a kick out of stuff like this, a contemporary inscription that uses a name that I run across in the Bible. This guy has the name Stephanos written across the top here. The sigma, tau, epsilon, phi, alpha, nu, omicron, and sigma. It's earlier than the Stephen that we run into here, but it's his name in Greek from this part of the world. So I'm going to show you a few examples like that. To me, in part, it just says this isn't just something made up in the 16th century by somebody that's using English names or whatever. These are authentic names. Now, there is one in here that I have not been able to find any example of among the inscriptions or the papyri or anything Old Testament. And the odd thing is it sounds more authentic than any of the others. We'll come to that. Here's a papyrus from about AD 200. I would struggle to pick out the name Stephen on this, and so I've highlighted it for you. Their handwriting is a little different. Instead of the Z-looking sigma, we've got the lunate, the C-looking sigma. But the little letters inside that box actually say Stephanos. This is the inscription you saw in the previous slide was about 400 BC. This one's about 200 AD. To me, that says this was a popular name for quite a while. Stephen. Stephanos. By the way, in Greek, that name means crown. The wreath that was given to athletes upon winning a race, it's a Stephanos. It's a crown. You run across it in Book of Revelation and that kind of stuff. Before I move on to Philip, Stephen is important. He will come up in the very next section, and he does some amazing things, gives an amazing testimony, and dies as the first martyr of the church. And so it's no wonder to me that his name comes up first here as one of the seven. Our second one is Philip. And this is a coin from probably the best known Philip of antiquity outside of the Bible, Philip II of Macedon. He was the father of Alexander the Great. And the inscription here only has his name, the Phi, Yoda, Lambda, Yoda, two pies. I don't know why one leg is a little shorter than the other, but that's what they are. And then it's a genitive, Philip Pu, Omicron, Upsilon, because it doesn't just mean the name Philip, it's of Philip, as in this is a coin of Philip. This was minted by him. The name means horse lover. You recognize phileo, to love or to adore or to be fond of something. And hippos is a horse. Hippopotamus is a horse of the water, a water horse. Hippopotamus. Philippos is a guy that's fond of horses. And I get a charge out of this because he has shown himself on a horse. So this is, what I say, 4th century BC, father of Alexander the Great. I'll just show you one other. I know you can't read this, and I can't either. Even when I zoomed in, it took me a little work to highlight these. But this is a declaration by a man in Egypt, 3rd century AD. His father's name is Philip, so Appion, the son of Philip. So Appion is the guy that's writing this out. The son of Philip, and then he has 4 children, and he names them, and one of them is also called Philip. And so the name actually appears 5 times on this one papyrus document. So again, we have gone from 4th century BC to 3rd century AD, 700 years, and a very common name. And so we're not surprised to run across it here in the New Testament either. Philip is the second person named here. He also was an important figure of the New Testament because once we read the account of Stephen being martyred, we have the account of Philip. He goes up to Samaria and preaches up there. He runs into a magician that wants to purchase rights to this kind of power. God sends him down the road from Jerusalem to Gaza, where he runs into the Ethiopian eunuch, riding slowly along in his carriage, reading out of Isaiah and not getting it. You've probably felt that feeling before. And then he's taken off from there miraculously to Caesarea, and Paul eventually runs into him at Caesarea. When Paul houses with him, it identifies him as Philip, who was one of the 7. It's like, yeah, there he is again. So Philip is a pretty significant character also in the New Testament. Not as major as Peter or Paul, but the rest of these guys, this is the only time that they appear in the New Testament. But these first 2 had significant ministries. Yes? Their city was named Philippi. It's over in that region, actually, of Macedon, where Philip II came from. Couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly what the connection there is, or if there is one, but it wouldn't surprise me. But Philip is a fairly common name during this period. Unlike our next one, Prochorus. And that's the reason all I've got for you here is a picture, a relatively modern painting. Theoretically, the name, well, you would recognize chorus as a chorus or a choir or something along those lines, a group of musicians or dancers or something like that. And pra just means, well, it can mean something like before, but it can also mean the chief of or the head of. And so this name could be interpreted as choir director, which is quite kind of an interesting name. Sorry, I couldn't find a single example of the use of this name in any contemporary inscriptions or papyri or anything like that. Apparently it became more common later on, and in fact even in the modern day over in Greece and areas of the Near East, they use this name, but I think most often it's because of its appearance here in the book of Acts. People that want to be named after a saint or something like that will use the name Prochorus. According to church tradition, he was the scribe to whom, who John used in authoring his gospel. Thus the picture here. It's tradition we don't really know. I wish I could tell you more about him or his name, but that's it. So we'll move on to some that are a little more interesting. Nicanor. The name means victory man. Nika, Nike, Nikao, those are verbs and nouns. To be victorious. Nike comes from that same Greek word. They stole it. And then the ending onor, oner, just means man in Greek. So, victorious man, maybe something like that. Man of victory. The name appears a number of times in other literature. It was fairly common. I know you don't read 1st and 2nd Maccabees very much, which is fine. But there are a couple of relatively well-known figures that are mentioned in Maccabees that have this name. You can about make it out on this papyrus document I've got up here. In this case, he's a policeman in Egypt and has that name. In Maccabees, again, he's one of the soldiers that had command of a group of elephants, an elephant herd that was supposed to go down and find and wipe out the Maccabees. The guy in charge of the elephants was a Nicanor. There was a governor of Judea by that name. But other than this, the name doesn't appear in the New Testament, but fairly well known from this time. The next name is in Greek Timon. I suppose in English that would be Timon. That word, that name, means honor or respect. If I was going to say I honor someone, I would say Timao. I honor them. And his name basically means respect or honor. It's actually, while probably not one that you've run into very often, it's actually quite common in that day and time. This papyrus includes the name of a man by the name of Timon, who is also a son of Timon. So the name appears twice right in a row. I don't know. If I was the school teacher that taught that guy how to write, I'd be embarrassed. That's really messy. Oh well. Okay, and then here comes my favorite one, Parmesan. Parmenas. Is that right? Oh, interesting. I guess I should watch Lion King more often. Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. Because it's not a name, I don't think I know any. I mean, we have like Timothy's or that kind of thing, but yeah, how they. Uh, it was fairly common in antiquity, so I don't know what happened to it. She said there's a character in The Lion King that's got that name, so a modern day Hollywood version, yeah, which they do that sometimes, yeah. Actually get something right. Oh, really? Is he not a good character? Okay. Well, this guy in Acts 6 was a good character. Parmenas, and this is usually considered to be a shortened version of Parmenides, the longer Greek name Parmenides. Here we have a philosopher of that name, and you can see the Greek inscription at the bottom of this base, which is a bust of him. The name means steadfast or trustworthy in Greek. And this philosopher is probably the best known Parmenides in antiquity, but the name is not, it's not that common outside of a few cases like him. And finally, we had a Nicanor, now we have a Nicolas, and you hear the similarity, the Nico similarity between those two. I'll skip that one and just show you this one. So it's a combination of that same victory word, Nika, but the ending is different. It's laos, which is people. So is it one who conquers people, or is it the people's conqueror? It's a little hard to tell, but it's made up of those two Greek components, and that's one of the ways we know it's actually a Greek name. It's not a Hebrew name in Greek letters. This is kind of an interesting fellow as well, because the text tells us he's a proselyte from Antioch. You know what? I need my map again. Antioch is a major city right up here. It was a city that was founded by Alexander the Great, like almost 4 centuries earlier. And it was one of the 3 largest cities in the world at this time. The other 2 being Alexandria down in Egypt and Rome itself. So a major, major city. Get back down to here's a modern day picture of it in northern Syria. What's a proselyte? A convert, exactly. Yeah. So this guy is not even a native Jew. He grew up as a Greek and converted to Judaism. And presumably that involved a profession of faith, cutting off some flesh, and probably being dunked, baptized, ritual bath type thing. So he converted from paganism to Judaism and then followed the shift of Judaism into Christianity. And he's on the right path, despite how unstable that might sound. He's a proselyte. This is the first person we've run into that's been a Greek that's part of the church. Now, I'm sure that there were other proselytes within the body if they picked this one as a leader. But it's the first one we've run into that's been named by the text. And I think we're beginning to get more hint again of what's to come, with eventually the church growing to incorporate and eventually become mostly composed of Greeks. Okay, oh boy, 5 minutes. I gotta move. So before, did I read that? Verse 6. These they brought before the apostles, and after praying, they laid their hands on them. If you had asked me a week ago what was going on here, I probably would have said, oh, they're creating the office of deacon. These are the first deacons. And I'm not so sure about that anymore, for a couple of reasons. One is that the name, the title deacon, which actually it just means servant, but as a noun, that word doesn't occur in here anywhere. They're never called deacons. Are they doing the work of a deacon? Because that would be the other way we would tell, right? Well, I mean, they're supposed to take care of, well, the way the apostles put it is serving tables, the distribution of food to widows. They're supposed to oversee that. And yet we've got, coming up in the next couple of chapters, two of these guys that don't stay on the reservation, right? They don't just take care of those material needs. Stephen, even here in Jerusalem, becomes a real evangelist, preacher, martyr. Philip, same thing. He's out preaching the word. You could make the case, preaching the word, evangelizing, also, I mean, in some sense, that's the responsibility of all of us, so no surprise that these guys are doing that too. You see my conundrum? It's like, would we today technically call these guys deacons? I'm not sure. They have some functions that are very hands-on, earthy, administrative as well. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Like I said, a week ago I would have said, of course. This is the first place where deacons are picked and approved and given tasks and that kind of thing. I'm second thinking that a little bit. What are they if they're not deacons? Yeah. And I'm going to weasel out of that by saying we're in a bit of a transition period, and I'm not 100% sure everything is settled yet. There's a need that has arisen, and these guys are picked to meet the need. But they're definitely not restricted like, okay, you guys are deacons, so all you can do is, I mean, not that that's the case anywhere in the New Testament, but they're doing some things that I would later on, not in our section, that I would not have thought, oh yeah, that's your typical deacon up in Samaria evangelizing. Sounds like an evangelist. Well, okay, you can be a deacon and an evangelist at the same time. I don't know. The word's not used here, so to me that kind of leaves it open question. And I do think there is some transition stuff going on here. The need is met, clearly, by people that are part of the group that has the need. And that's kind of cool, I think. It's a great question. Oh boy. Okay, verse 7. This is our last one. The word of God kept on spreading, and the number of the disciples continued to increase greatly in Jerusalem. And a great many of the priests were becoming obedient to the faith, which is kind of an interesting little note. One of my favorite commentators observed here that the priestly class, they think there were 7,000 or 8,000 priests in Palestine at this time. Most of them were quite poor. They were not well taken care of by this mammoth temple edifice. The people that profited off of that were few, and most of the priestly class didn't profit off of it, even though they were supposed to have been taken care of it by it. You would not necessarily, well, I wouldn't have expected the priestly class to be a class that latches on to the gospel of Jesus Christ. But they were. The seed gets cast, and, well, what do you know? Guess where the fertile soil is? It's a bunch of these guys that know the word. And they're like, that fits, and that fits, and that fits. Yeah, I'm in. Kind of fun stuff. They serve God for no gain. That makes a difference. That makes a difference. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. Little food for thought there at the end of your handout. The church faces an internal issue and appoints capable men to deal with it. We've already had some external pressure, but here an issue, well, Ananias and Sapphira, but here the entire church deals with this issue. They have a need, and they appoint capable people to take care of it. Second point, language and culture are natural barriers to unity. I think that's just human nature, but they're not insurmountable problems. And so you see that happening here. At the same time, I think it's fascinating. It looks like they appointed Hellenists to take care of the Hellenists. That seems very effective to me, very efficient, in some ways very natural, but I think wise that they would do that. And the last point, this is just me. Seems doubtful that this passage should be taken as a directive on how to appoint deacons. That's my conclusion based on what it seems to me is going on here. You can disagree with that. That's fine. If you don't want to follow me down that path, you don't need to. But you've heard my explanation, and it's a little different than the way I would have viewed it if you'd asked me off the cuff a week ago. But do with it what you will. We do have some very specific directives later on in the epistles of Paul on how to pick deacons, and that's probably more what I would lean toward doing. Any questions or observations? Yep. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is amazing. I not to make too much of a disjunction, but I think our faith is sometimes a little more cerebral. We read the text, we believe it. For them, they're experiencing it. A lot of them are seeing these things. They don't have the text per se. They've got the Old Testament, and there's a lot in there. But like you say, not the Romans Road. But they're seeing stuff going on, signs and wonders and amazing things. And yeah, it's a little different. Hard to put our feet in those shoes and get a good feel for that. But thanks. You've all been very patient. Next week we'll meet downstairs, and Murray will bring us the word. I'm looking forward to that. Let's close in a word of prayer. Lord, thank you so much for the record that you have left us here. We see much here that we can emulate, and it's just fun to watch how you have worked to grow your church, and we can see your hand in so much of what goes on here. Grant us the wisdom to be faithful in our setting, and especially to take care of those around us in need, to be faithful in that, and also in studying your word and prayer like the disciples. And we ask for your blessing on that effort. In your name I pray. Amen.